Stories that matter. The journey of life from birth to death is an extraordinary trip, sometimes filled with great joy and excitement, but at other times filled with pain, sorrow, and disappointment. Stories That Matter shares both extremes with you. Sometimes our stories will make you feel very happy, but the journey of life is not all happiness. Other times, the journey of life will make you feel sad, for all of us have experienced both extremes. Stories That Matter will begin right after the break with a story that will touch your heart in the journey of life.
Welcome to Stories That Matter. I'm your host, Doug Thompson. My special guest today is a pretty darn good guest. Her name's Cindy Thomas. And Cindy, I've been looking forward to visiting with you for quite a while because I love your articles that you put in the Globe, the Branson Globe. And since you and I had talked about doing this interview, I've looked through some of the material, and I write a weekly article for our newspaper, faith-based one, and I always tell everybody this one, even though I've written about 450 of them now, I can tell you which ones I wrote, and I can tell you which ones the Lord inspired me to write, because His are good, mine are very average. And you go through the same thing probably as you write an article. One of the things I'm doing all the talking here, but I'm going to stop in a minute because I know in my case I have to get the thoughts. What am I going to do? What do I want to write about? And then I can write it. And but if He inspires me to do it, then it flows real easy. Tell me about your writing career.
Well, my writing career tried to start decades ago when my children were little. And when you have little children, you tend to get busy. So it didn't take off a lot back then, although I enjoyed it. I worked in some different nonprofit scenarios part-time while the children were young. Then I went to work for the Assemblies of God national headquarters in Springfield when the youngest child was in high school. I had to leave that position. I worked in the U.S. Missions Division, and one of my duties was writing PR content. So I enjoyed that a lot. But I left that position because my father had a bad fall. I was the only immediate family left, and I needed to be closer to Harrison, Arkansas, which is where he lived. So I quit full-time work and moved down south of Branson. Started the writing journey as a freelancer for the Assemblies of God, then found out that the Branson Globe was looking for another freelancer or two. So that turned out to be me. And then there are a couple of other faith-based publications, but those are kind of the main two places that my writing shows up, as well as my personal blog. But as far as the devotional column, when I began to write for the Globe, we were in the middle of the lockdowns and all that fun from the pandemic. And I felt like so much of the news was bad. Everywhere you turned, social media, everywhere the news was bad. So I inquired about doing a faith-based column for the Globe, and it sort of went from there. I was taught by my parents the importance of personal Bible study and devotions. And I also like to keep a pencil and paper, a real one, a physical notepad from the dollar store, and take notes. And so a lot of my little columns come from something the Lord has just really put into my spirit as I'm doing my personal Bible study. And it ends up in those notes. And those, as you say, are the best ideas, the ones that the Lord drops in my spirit and I write them down. The times I have found myself sitting there with a column to write, people are expecting it, and I don't really have that quickening. Those are some, as you say, more like average columns. I try not to let that happen too often because I do try to have my regular devotions and have some of those I can thumb back through and think, oh yeah, the Lord really spoke to me about that. So then I'll go back and write it.
Well, we're talking about the same language because we both go through the same thing, but I love your articles, and the Globe's been blessed to have your articles in there because they just reach out and touch your heart. And I can tell from your writing is unique from the standpoint that I can feel your heart as you're going through that. Because when you talk about things specifically, you use the information about your dad. Your dad
Yes.
came from the great, what was as known as the greatest generation,
Yes.
because of World War II and what a bunch of farm kids and others went through, and all of a sudden they were picked up out of the farms and the small communities, and away they went overseas to places that they weren't really expecting to ever do. And your dad was in that category, and I know that you had an uncle who was also in the military. And we're going to cut away and take a break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about what your family's been through in regards to that. So we'll be
Okay.
right back. You're watching Stories That Matter. Welcome back to Stories That Matter. I am your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest, Cynthia Thomas. She's a writer for the Globe and the Branson Globe, and an excellent writer and good articles. Love talking to her. So tell me about your family. Tell me about your parents.
Okay. A lot of things about my dad find their way into the reflections column. My father grew up poor in the rural Arkansas Ozarks. He saw his older brother drafted into the Army and sent to Germany, where my Uncle Ray, ended up being badly wounded. My grandfather had actually received the "We regret to inform you" telegram, but then it was found out that he had managed to not only fool the enemy into thinking he was dead, but then crawl off the battlefield, help another soldier into a Jeep, and drive the Jeep to safety.
Wow.
So I have other uncles whose stories also made it to me. One was a POW in Germany for several months. So the fact that those people could come back with the limited resources for serving veterans, that they've improved so much now, and so I'm thankful. But at that time, they just came back. Sometimes they internalized the stress and the trauma they had been through, but they came back and mostly just did what they needed to do. Farming, getting a job, raising their families. And so my cousins and I, my sister and I were very much shaped by that. My father came back after 3 years in the South Pacific and married my mother. There is a story to that. She was one of a large family, several girls who were waiting for men to come back from World War II. Not an uncommon story during those years. She did not wish to commit to a relationship with my dad until he went to church. Her church of preference was a little Methodist background, Pentecostal leaning church. And he went, and then she found her way into, when they moved to Kansas for my dad to work aircraft, and they became acquainted with the Assemblies of God church. And that was the church where my dad really, really found a serious relationship with the Lord. So I would have to say a lot of my faith background is due to the fact that my mother was firm in her resolve not to get into a relationship with someone who did not go to church. Sadly, my mother passed away. My sister was born. And then 9 years later, after they were told there might not be any more, I was born. And when I was 2, my mother developed a brain tumor. And I would say that it was her faith through that experience Even though she did not receive a miraculous healing, she passed away when I was 4. But her faith, her holding on to her belief that God cared about her through that was also a big influence on my dad. And so he continued even after her death to pass that legacy on to my sister and me. Interestingly, out of that family of girls, there was one left, not married, because she had lost a significant other in World War II. That, my aunt, ended up being my stepmother. So that's an interesting story in itself, but she was also a very godly woman and just, continued. I mean, that's the grandma my kids know, and just continued that faith heritage in her own way. I have, a lot to thank her for as well.
Did your dad talk about the war much, or did you kind of have to pull it out of him to get him started?
He did not talk much. I can recall a specific incident when I was 6 or 7 years old that he came out and handed me a little bag. I was just playing in the yard. And he came out and handed me a little bag and said, "You've been asking some questions," which I had, I think, from history class at school, maybe, because I was in 2nd, 3rd grade. And in that bag were his campaign ribbons from the Marine Corps and his star for meritorious citation as a rifleman. I have those now in a shadow box with some pictures. But I didn't know the questions to ask, really. And I wish I had asked better questions because he did not talk much unless he was asked.
And I understand that's pretty much the way that it goes for those who were in World War II. They just didn't want to talk about it much, but they would if they had to and were asked to. Did your dad come to the Lord because of your mom, or did he move that as a slow process on his own?
I believe he had made kind of a surface commitment because he knew that it was important to her. And then around the time she became ill, he realized, I either need to take this seriously and be all in or not at all. So once he made that commitment, he abandoned some lifestyle choices that he had previously kind of committed to not doing, but at that point he began to take it wholeheartedly.
Okay, and your dad, you told me before we started that your dad died about a year ago, and
Yes.
He was at that time what age?
He was 95. I went through a lot of grief processing because of the effect of COVID. I had initially kept my dad at home, and then as he became weaker physically, I was just simply not managing well with no other family really close, physically close, I mean, in distance. And so he was in a nursing home. And then when the COVID restrictions hit, of course, I felt terribly guilty at not having kept him at home. I was very blessed, though, about 2 months into COVID restrictions, he was able to transfer to a beautiful faith-based facility in Harrison, Arkansas, Hillcrest Home, owned by the Mennonite Church. And I could not have asked for better. They obviously had to abide by the health department regulations, but within those, they did a phenomenal job doing the best they could at keeping the residents socialized and facilitating the best visits they could. I feel so blessed. They have a lot of staff that are young people who earned part of their tuition as a nurse or an aide, I believe is how the program works. Then they give back by serving for a few years at the nursing home to pay for that. I don't know the details, but those young men were wonderful at engaging my dad in conversation. They probably got more info out of him about his World War II experiences than I had. And it's funny because being a faith-based facility, sometimes they would offer to pray with him, and he appreciated it. And then he would ask how he could pray with them.
That's
And
awesome.
a couple of them told me that that was just really special, that he offered to pray with them and they knew that he was. So overall, it wasn't the most wonderful timing with COVID to feel like I had quality time with him, but largely because of that facility, I felt like I was blessed, able to spend some time with him. I would go in and play the piano or the guitar and sing old gospel songs, and they'd hook me up with a speaker so that other residents could hear without the health department getting annoyed. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. We're gonna cut away, take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Stories That Matter. I'm your host, Doug Thompson. My special guest is Cynthia Thomas, and she's in Branson. She's a writer for the Globe, which is one of the most popular papers in the city, of course. And I know their circulation is tremendous. And Rob Doherty is the editor of the paper, does a fantastic job. And I know that it's a lot of work to put out a newspaper when you're doing it on a weekly basis like you are, especially to come up with new articles and so forth. And we've been talking a little bit about that in the earlier segments, but tell me a little about your family, your kids, and your husband.
Well, I met my husband at college. I went to Friends University in Wichita, Kansas, and I majored in English. He majored in music, and somehow we got derailed from those things. We had a photography business for a while and this and that, but he did begin teaching music when our children were young. He started at a small rural school in Arkansas, then he's been at a few different schools in Missouri. He spent 12 years at Galena, Missouri in Stone County. Last year, he was the assistant band director at Hollister and thought, okay, an assistant job close to home, kind of wind down toward retirement. But then Forsyth became open this year, and he saw so much potential there and such a nice community. He couldn't resist. So he is the band director at Forsyth. You'll notice I have a Panther shirt on, and tonight is their homecoming game. So the band will be appearing, and I'll be there. We have 3 adult children. Ashley and her husband live in Springfield. Ashley was an English teacher for a while, and now she has a successful online presence with some blogs. Her husband is a musician and is currently releasing his first album. His name is Josiah Mann, and I put things on my Facebook page regularly when he has released something new. So we enjoy spending time with them since they are the closest. My 2 sons live in the Kansas City area, Bonner Springs, Kansas, actually. Brian is the creative arts and worship pastor at the Hill Ministries in Shawnee. He and his wife, Lauren, have 2 of the cutest little kids ever, of course, since they're my grandchildren. I can say that. Charlotte and Joseph. And then my other son, Luke, he's not married yet, but he's a very talented young man, plays the violin, enjoys coming back to the Ozarks to get involved in traditional fiddle, that kind of thing. But he also serves in the music and creative and online ministry at the Hill.
Well, did that musical ability that they have acquired, I'm sure some of it came from you, but did your husband, just simply because of what his career was, did they just see it and sort of gravitate to it?
Kind of a combination. My daughter began playing the French horn because my husband was teaching somewhere that He didn't have very many French horn players. She ended up marching at Missouri State with the band there and enjoying that a lot, and is still a good French horn player. Brian enjoyed guitar, and Luke actually picked up his first violin when my husband took a job in Springfield, Missouri, teaching orchestra, and had not played stringed instruments since his college days. And so he needed to brush up. And Luke picked up the violin and was messing around with it. And we realized he was actually playing tunes that made sense. And so we thought, this kid needs lessons. So I taught all the children how to play the piano. My husband was the one who kind of guided them into making sure they had lessons, good quality professional teachers, that kind of thing.
Well, I bet it's a lot of fun when you guys get together at Christmas or New Year's or whatever the special occasion is, to get all of the family together and the grandkids. And you got to sit back on the couch and just sort of look and say, Lord, thank you. Thank you, Lord.
Enjoy that, and we are very thankful. They've, in spite of the faults and failures we all have as parents, they are doing okay, so that's a blessing.
That's good. And who's going to win the game tonight?
Okay, you would need to ask my husband and my son because they do the whole fantasy game and all that. Yeah.
I just figured you would say our school.
Oh, you mean the Forsyth game?
Yeah.
Now, they've made it exciting because the games I've been at, they've won by 1 point.
Oh, wow.
Within the last minute.
Yeah, awesome. You're going to have a good time tonight. We're going to cut away, take a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back, and this is our final segment of the show for today. Our special guest, Cindy Thomas. Cindy, thank you so much for taking time to visit with us. And if somebody wants to take a look at your material because they're so interested in it, and I guarantee them, if they look at it, they will find your writing is excellent. Where do they go?
Well, they will find the reflections columns in past Branson Globe issues, and you can see those at bransonglobe.com. I also have lots of little stories about my dad, personal musings, more Bible study, things I've enjoyed at my personal blog site, cynthiajthomas.com. And I have some wonderful stories I've written for the Assemblies of God News. You can see those, get some inspirational ministry from news.ag.org.
Got it. Thank you so much. And Cindy, thank you so much for visiting with us. God bless you. Keep it up.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you. BDS Productions is a family-owned company working hard to bring quality programming to viewers worldwide. Thanks for your support, and may God continue to bless you.